Is Buckingham Palace finally ready for a reckoning over the births of Meghan Markle's two children, Archie and Lily?
So she had to accept, that the things would be happening on a national level. And that's what the royal family has to accept as well. And most of them understand that. And so you make announcements. You tell people, the child's going to be born. You tell them where it's going to be born. You tell them when it was born. You show the child at a certain point. You tell us who the godparents are going to be. And we all enjoy this. And we're very much then, we, the general public, very much on the side of the person doing that and sort of enjoying it because they are a family at the centre of the nation. And that's all part of it. So to deny us that, I think, was sort of, kicking in causing trouble and showing she was going to do it her way. And that's when things began to go wrong.
Hugo Vickers, 40 years, writing about the royal family, captain of the lay stewards at St George's Chapel, went on camera on May 13th and said something that stopped people in their tracks. This isn't some outsider making noise. This is the man who carried the Queen's coffin inside St George's Chapel. The man the Financial Times called the most knowledgeable royal biographer on the planet. The man whose new book on Queen Elizabeth II shot straight into the Sunday Times top 10 the week it dropped, serialized in the Daily Mail and everything. And on camera, on the record, he said the Archie birth timeline doesn't add up. Lady Colin Campbell has been asking the same questions since 2020. For 6 years, people dismissed her, she's a loose cannon, ignore her. But now, an establishment historian, a man who reads at royal services, has said the exact same thing and meant every word. Today's video breaks down what Vickers actually said, what he held back, what's quietly sitting in his new book as it makes its way onto bookshelves across the Commonwealth, and one small but critical documentary detail at the Buckingham Palace forecourt that makes all of this matter. 8 days ago, we walked through Tom Bower's 6 versions of Archie's birth.
She's the only woman, as far as I know, if you look at the timeline, who gave birth and then subsequently went into labour later in the day.
Meghan at the Albert Hall. How many weeks pregnant was she supposed to be? Was it about 8 weeks? And she looks as if she's at least 5 months pregnant.
Today, we hear from the establishment voice. Different historian, same conclusion. Vickers didn't show up to talk about Archie. He came to promote his new biography, Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History, published by Hodder on April 9th of this year. 672 pages, 40 years of personal knowledge of the late Queen. A book that earned 5 stars from The Telegraph and a review from the Financial Times so powerful it's followed Vickers onto every chat show in Britain. But somewhere in that interview, the conversation shifted to Meghan, as it always does on Wotton's programme, and Vickers' calm, measured tone stepped right out of the book and into the moment. He called the Archie birth crazy business. He said she was the only woman he knew of who, based on the timeline given, appeared to have given birth and then gone into labour again later that same day. He pointed out the obstetrician was never named, the godparents were never named, and the secrecy, he said, was the part he simply could not square. Now, this isn't the first time Vickers said it. He made the same point to The Sun back in October 2024, a longer interview about why he had lost confidence in the Sussexes. The quote ran online, got syndicated, and nobody touched it.
Do you remember Meghan actually refused to use the hospital that was usually used by royals and refused to use all of the normal medical staff, and there was all of the weirdness over the timing of the birth of Archie?
Then Dan Wotton picked it up this month, and here's what makes that interesting. Wotton was at The Sun in 2019. He covered the birth announcement as it happened. Last week, on his own programme, he said it on camera too. Vickers never used the word fraud. He didn't need to. Step away from the historian for a second and walk to the gilded railings outside Buckingham Palace. That easel at the forecourt isn't decoration, it is the documentary instrument by which a royal birth becomes public record. A framed notice, hand-signed by the attending physician, placed at the railings the morning of the birth, photographed by the Royal Rota Pool, and entered into the institution's archive. That is the convention, and it exists for a reason. It traces back to 1688, to the warming pan scandal.
And why it was interesting to me is because, Hugo Vickers is a cautious guy. He's a guy who has very close connections to the royal family. And a lot of what he says, you have to read between the lines.
and the Privy Council depositions that followed. It was formalised in 1948 when the Home Secretary's attendance was finally dropped and the surgeon-gynecologist's signature took its place. For Prince George in July 2013, 3 names appeared at the bottom of that easel: Sir Marcus Setchell, Alan Farthing, Guy Thorpe Beeston. Real men, real medical licenses, verifiable, quotable, on the record. For Princess Charlotte in May 2015, 2 of those same names returned. For Prince Louis in April 2018, the same 2 again photographed shaking hands with Prince William on the Lindo Wing steps, quoted in the press, filed into the record. And in every single case, the surgeon-gynecologist's name was confirmed by the palace in advance. On the 6th of May 2019, the easel went up for Archie. Time of birth: 5:26 BST. Weight: 7 pounds 3 ounces. Hospital: the Portland in Westminster. Doctor: blank. The Portland Hospital issued a brief statement of congratulation and cited patient confidentiality, which is hospital language for
I couldn't care less who the godparents were, but I do think one ought to, why don't you just tell us, So you could see she was kind of had her own agenda. But what I didn't think she would do is to, I never thought she'd stay, to be honest, but I never thought she'd do it in the reign of the Queen, but she was prepared to do that.
We're not saying a word. Fine. Hospitals don't have to talk. But here's the problem: every single thing the British public has ever been told about what happened inside that building that morning came from one of 2 people, Harry or Meghan. No named third witness on record. Not the doctor, not the midwife, not one member of hospital staff. 4 easels, 3 doctors, 1 blank space, and no royal commentator has ever satisfactorily explained it. Lady Colin Campbell has been raising the Archie question since 26 years. Hundreds of hours of long-form content from her chair at Castle Goring surround Hugo Vickers, 40 years writing about the royal family, captain of the lay stewards at St George's Chapel, went on camera on May 13th and said something that stopped people in their tracks. This isn't some outsider making noise. This is the man who carried the Queen's coffin inside St George's Chapel. The man the Financial Times called the most knowledgeable royal biographer on the planet. The man whose new book on Queen Elizabeth II shot straight into the Sunday Times top 10 the week it dropped, serialized in the Daily Mail and everything.
Again, I was at The Sun at the time, and I posed a whole load of questions to her team, her communications team, and it never made any sense. They lied. They lied about time. They lied about the location. It was so weird.
And on camera, on the record, he said the Archie birth timeline doesn't add up. Lady Colin Campbell has been asking the same question since 2020. For 6 years, people dismissed her, she's a loose cannon, ignore her. But now, an establishment historian, a man who reads at royal services, has said the exact same thing and meant every word. Today's video breaks down what Vickers actually said, what he held back, what's quietly sitting in his new book as it makes its way onto bookshelves across the Commonwealth, and one small but critical documentary detail at the Buckingham Palace forecourt that makes all of this matter. 8 days ago, we walked through Tom Bower's 6 versions of Archie's birth. Today, we hear from the establishment voice. Different historian, same conclusion. Vickers didn't show up to talk about Archie. He came to promote his new biography, Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History, published by Hodder on April 9th of this year. 672 pages. 40 years of personal knowledge of the late Queen. A book that earned 5 stars from The Telegraph and a review from the Financial Times, so powerful it's followed Vickers onto every chat show in Britain.
She gave birth to them, and she has quite deliberately caused doubt, and she has created mischief, knowing that it would damage the royal family, which would show a level of spite and malice that is truly not only sick, but evil.
But somewhere in that interview, the conversation shifted to Meghan, as it always does on Wotton's programme, and Vickers' calm, measured tone stepped right out of the book and into the moment. He called the Archie birth crazy business. He said she was the only woman he knew of who, based on the timeline given, appeared to have given birth and then gone into labour again later that same day. He pointed out the obstetrician was never named, the godparents were never named, and the secrecy, he said, was the part he simply could not square. Now, this isn't the first time Vickers said it. He made the same point to The Sun back in October 2024, a longer interview about why he had lost confidence in the Sussexes. The quote ran online, got syndicated, and nobody touched it. Then Dan Wootton picked it up this month. And here's what makes that interesting. Wootton was at The Sun in 2019. He covered the birth announcement as it happened. Last week, on his own program, he said it on camera too. Vickers never used the word fraud. He didn't need to. Step away from the historian for a second and walk to the gilded railings outside Buckingham Palace. That easel at the forecourt isn't decoration, it is the documentary instrument by which a royal birth becomes public record. A framed notice.
All other royal babies in the line of succession have had their births signed off. Princess Eugenie, Princess Beatrice, Sarah York, Diana Wales, Catherine Wales, you name it. Everybody knows where the babies came from, at what time, with proof. The only two children that there is no proof for is Prince Archie Bunker and Princess Lily. You better hope that she's really entitled to what they claim she's entitled to.
Hand signed by the attending physician, placed at the railings the morning of the birth, photographed by the Royal Rota Pool, and entered into the institution's archive. That is the convention, and it exists for a reason. It traces back to 1688, to the warming pan scandal and the Privy Council depositions that followed. It was formalized in 1948 when the Home Secretary's attendance was finally dropped and the surgeon gynecologist's signature took its place. For Prince George in July 2013, 3 names appeared at the bottom of that easel: Sir Marcus Setchell, Alan Farthing, Guy Thorpe-Beeston. Real men, real medical licenses, verifiable, quotable, on the record. For Princess Charlotte in May 2015, 2 of those same names returned. For Prince Louis in April 2018, the same 2 again photographed shaking hands with Prince William on the Lindo Wing steps, quoted in the press, filed into the record. And in every single case, the surgeon gynecologist's name was confirmed by the palace in advance. On the 6th of May 2019, the easel went up for Archie. Time of birth, 5:26 BST. Weight, 7 pounds 3 ounces. Hospital, the Portland in Westminster. Doctor, blank. The Portland Hospital issued a brief statement of congratulation and cited patient confidentiality, which is hospital language for "we're not saying a word." Fine, hospitals don't have to talk. But here's the problem. Every single thing the British public has ever been told about what happened inside that building that morning came from one of 2 people, Harry or Meghan. No named third witness on record.
And I have spoken to doctors, nurses, many women who've given birth to children, and all of them say the same thing. Those photographs of Meghan and the way the baby bump performed are totally unexpected, and they're not aware of any baby, any pregnant woman who is genuinely pregnant having her bump perform the way Meghan's has performed.
Not the doctor, not the midwife, not one member of hospital staff. 4 easels, 3 doctors, 1 blank space. And no royal commentator has ever satisfactorily explained it. Lady Colin Campbell has been raising the Archie question since 26 years, hundreds of hours of long-form content, from her chair at Castle Goring, surrounded by the 7 biographies she's published since 1992, including her 2020 book Meghan and Harry, The Real Story, expanded by Pegasus in 2022. She has been the most cited voice on this question, and she has paid for it in column inches. Before anyone says, "Isn't Lady Colin Campbell the one with the complicated history?" Stop right there. The question was never just whether Lady C said it. The question is whether Hugo Vickers said it. And he did on camera, to a journalist, while promoting a Sunday Times top 10 book. The historian who reads at services in St George's Chapel just confirmed what the controversial aristocrat has been saying for 6 years. This is no longer just Lady C's case. This is the establishment's case now. The day after Vickers' interview dropped, Lady C appeared on the same program. Wotton played her the Vickers quote, and she did something she rarely does. She slowed down. She knows exactly what Vickers represents and what she represents. He has institutional positions to protect. She lost hers in 1975. And on this one question, after 6 years apart, they've landed in exactly the same place. Then she went further than Vickers ever did. She called what she's been describing for 6 years a scandal, one she compared to the great frauds of royal history. Lady C named it out loud. Vickers wouldn't. But both said the same thing. The timeline is wrong. Now, the book itself is the bigger story. Queen Elizabeth II, a personal history, runs 672 pages, published by Hodder, serialized in the Daily Mail in early April. It's the work of a man who first met the late Queen in 1968 and went on to attend her in his lay steward role on more than 40 private occasions inside St George's Chapel. The Sussex chapter became the centerpiece of the Telegraph Review and landed Lady C a Hello magazine front page. That hello.
And another thing that I know that they do, if a royal lady who's about to give birth, there's 2 phone calls that the security team makes. One to the palace to inform Her Majesty that, she's gone into labor. And 2, that to the security, the head of security, to secure the premises where they go. Harry claims that they didn't do any of that. That means that the Royal Police Protection Officers violated security protocol, which will be a first.
Piece dated April 7th ran with the line that the book exposes the turmoil Prince Harry and Meghan caused the Queen in her final years. That's Hello magazine saying it, not a tabloid. The coziest, most royal-friendly mainstream outlet in Britain, and even they couldn't look away. Vickers writes, on his own authority, in a passage now widely quoted, that the distress the Sussexes caused the late Queen in her final years simply cannot be overstated, and he goes even further. In one passage, addressing what Harry's actual role had become by 2022, Vickers attributes a private remark directly to the late Queen herself. He said it on camera too. According to Vickers, in a private conversation he records carefully, the late Queen described her grandson as having become a carer for Archie. One sentence, attributed, cleared by Hodder's lawyers, and now it travels everywhere. Take a breath. That sentence isn't slang. It isn't snark. The late Queen belongs in the serious, clean register of history, and Vickers keeps her there. His care in framing that line is precisely why it stands. But it does stand. The man who carried the Queen's coffin into St George's Chapel has now placed her own private words into a Hodder hardback, and that line sits in the very same book as the Archie chapter he's been discussing on camera. Here's what needs to be said for anyone who has been watching this space since 2024. For 6 years, anyone who raised the Archie timeline question got the same treatment. She's on the fringe. She has form on this subject. Ignore her. The mainstream press wouldn't touch it. The proper royal commentators stayed away, and every single time the question came up, the response was never an answer. It was always an attack on the messenger. This week, that argument collapsed, not because Lady C found new evidence. She didn't. The timeline question is exactly the same one she's been raising since her 2020 book. What changed is who is now willing to ask it on camera. And that person is a man with personal access to the Queen's residence, attendance at 3 royal funerals, and a 672-page Hodder biography sitting in the Sunday Times top 10. You don't need to take any position on the Sussex children to see what's happening here. This question started on a channel run from a castle in West Sussex. It has now landed in a hardback you can buy at W.H. Smith.
It's a matter of responsibility, and I suspect it's such a hot potato that I suspect the resolution will be down the line when Harry and those children will be removed entirely from various situations and positions. That, I think, is going to be the neatest, cleanest way of resolving something rather than any confirmation or exposure.
The Royal Rota hasn't picked it up yet. The mainstream broadsheets haven't touched it yet. But give it a fortnight, because this is exactly what a story moving through the tears looks like in real time. Lady Colin Campbell knocked on this door for 6 years. On May 13th, the man who keeps the keys to St. George's Chapel opened it for her. So where does the documentary record stand now? 6 years and one hodder book later, the easel at Buckingham Palace forecourt for the 6th of May 2019 still carries a blank space where the obstetrician's signature should be. The certificate amendment filed on the 5th of June 2019 at Westminster Register Office is still on file. The Sussex spokesperson's statement from January 2021 attributing that amendment to the palace is still on public record. And not one third witness, no doctor, no midwife, no hospital staff member, has come forward in 84 months. What changed this week is the level at which this question now lives. It's no longer just long-form content online. It's a hodder hardback, a Daily Mail serialization, and an on-camera interview cleared by a publisher's own lawyers. That is a completely different tier, and once a question reaches that tier, it does not disappear. This is the work tracking the slow, patient way a story moves from one level to the next, and putting the receipts directly in your hands when it does. This week, those receipts sit in 3 places. The Vickers interview with Dan Wootton on YouTube and Substack, the hodder hardback sitting in high street bookshops right now, and the Tammany Stanley Daily Tea podcast for The Telegraph, recorded 10 days earlier, where Vickers was the headline guest. But let's step back and actually look at what just happened here, because the speed of this week deserves more than a quick summary. 3 separate media events, involving the same historian, the same core question, and the same blank space on that 2019 easel, all landing within a 10-day window. That is not a coincidence. That is a story that has finally found its moment. Think about the structure of what Vickers did. He didn't walk into Dan Wootton's studio to talk about Archie. He walked in to promote a 2-page biography of Queen Elizabeth II, a book 5 stars deep in The Telegraph, serialized in the Daily Mail, and already climbing the Sunday Times chart. He was there to talk about the late Queen. And then the conversation turned, as it always does on that program.
And Hugo is impeccably well connected. And Hugo, unlike me, because you see, Hugo can be chucked out because Hugo's position, so to speak, is entirely related to his royal connections and his social connections in this country, while of course mine aren't. I mean, if I were excluded as a part of the British establishment, I simply have the American and the Jamaican and the international to fall back on. Hugo has none of that. So Hugo is extremely cautious. Hugo, which I am not. I don't need to be.
And the most establishment royal historian in Britain said the thing that 6 years of YouTube streams and 2 Lady C books had never been able to fully pull into the mainstream. He said the timeline is crazy business. He said it calmly. He said it on camera. And then he went right back to talking about the Queen. That is the move of a man who has thought very carefully about what he is willing to say and what he is not. Vickers did not use the word fraud. He did not speculate about motive. He did not name a villain or point a finger at anyone directly. He identified a documentary inconsistency, a woman who, on the timeline provided, appeared to give birth and then go into labor later the same day, and he named the missing pieces. No obstetrician, no godparents, no satisfactory explanation for the level of secrecy involved. He handed the audience the shape of the question and left the answer deliberately open. That is not carelessness. That is precision, and there is a very important reason why that precision matters more than any loud accusation ever could. The moment you use the word fraud on camera without documentary proof, you hand every defender in the room a clean exit. You become the story instead of the question. The entire conversation shifts from the blank space on the easel to the person who dared to name it out loud. Vickers understood that instinctively, the way men who have spent 40 years moving through institutions understand exactly how those institutions protect themselves when they feel threatened. He gave the question legs without giving the defenders ammunition. That is a rare and deliberate skill, and it is a significant part of why this week is different from every single previous week on this subject. Now look at what Lady Colin Campbell did the very next day. She appeared on the same program, heard the Vickers quote played back to her in full, and did something that anyone who has watched her over the years would immediately recognize as significant. She slowed down. She didn't immediately fire back. She didn't perform vindication. She absorbed the moment quietly, and then she went further, because going further is exactly what she does when the moment calls for it. She named it a scandal, not a curiosity, not an anomaly. A scandal, one she placed in the company of the great institutional failures of royal history. Vickers lit the match with careful, measured language.
It's absolutely unbelievable that any member of the royal family could have set about creating what is an international scandal where people have the means as a result of her and her husband's conduct to question whether they have perpetrated the scam of the century upon not only the royal family and the British people, but the other realms of which any heir to the throne is heir to that throne as well.
Lady C held it directly to the curtain. The gap between what Vickers said and what Lady C said is not a gap in evidence or a gap in conviction. It is a gap in institutional position, and understanding that gap is essential to understanding why both voices matter equally this week. Vickers has access to royal residences. He holds lay steward responsibilities at St. George's Chapel. He has a publisher's legal team that cleared every single word of a 672-page manuscript before it went to print. He has decades of carefully cultivated relationships inside the very institutions this question touches. He has things to protect, real things, with real consequences if he missteps. Lady C lost her institutional standing in 1975, and in losing it, she gained something that establishment figures almost never possess the freedom to call something exactly what she believes it to be, without stopping to calculate the cost to a position she no longer holds. These two people are operating from completely opposite ends of the establishment spectrum, and they have still ended up saying the same essential thing. The timeline does not work. The documentary record has a gap, and the gap has never been explained. That convergence is the real story of this week. Not Vickers alone, not Lady C alone, but both of them, from opposite ends of the world that covers the British monarchy, landing on the same conclusion in the same 7-day window, on the same programme, about the same blank space, on the same 2019 forecourt easel. When that happens in any serious investigative context, when the cautious voice and the unfiltered voice reach the same destination independently, it means the question has weight it did not have before. It means something has moved. Let's lay out the documentary record one more time clearly, because now that the tier has shifted, it is worth having every piece in the right order. On the 6th of May 2019, the palace placed an easel at the Buckingham Palace forecourt announcing Archie's birth. Time of birth, weight, hospital, all present. Attending physician absent. That absence is not a minor administrative detail.
And now Harry has opted out. And for what? To be a carer for Archie. So it sounds like she had almost a bit of a premonition that this life in California wasn't going to work out for her grandson.
Every previous royal birth in the modern era produced an easel with named medical professionals whose credentials could be independently verified, whose faces appeared in press photographs outside the hospital doors, and whose signatures were entered into the institutional archive. For Prince George in July 2013, 3 names appeared at the bottom of that easel, real men with real medical licenses, photographed shaking hands with Prince William on the Lindo wing steps. For Princess Charlotte in May 2015, 2 of those same names returned. For Prince Louis in April 2018, the same 2 names again. Convention followed, record made, institution satisfied. For Archie Harrison in May 2019, the line where that name should have appeared was blank. Then, 30 days after the birth, on the 5th of June 2019, a certificate amendment was filed at Westminster Register Office. The Sussex spokesperson's statement that followed in January 2021 attributed this amendment to palace protocol. That statement remains on the public record today. The amendment remains on file, and in the 84 months since Archie's birth, not one medical professional, not one member of Portland Hospital staff, not one named third witness of any description has come forward publicly to place themselves in that room on that morning. Every single account the British public has ever received about what happened inside that building came from one of two sources, Harry or Meghan. That is the documentary picture. It has not changed in 6 years. And Hugo Vickers, in a cleared Hodder manuscript, has now acknowledged it from inside the establishment. This is not about forming an opinion on the Sussex children, on the marriage, or on any of the personal decisions that followed the birth. Those are separate conversations. This is specifically about a documentary gap that exists independently of any of that, a gap that was present on day one, that remains present today, and that the most credentialed royal biographer currently working in Britain has now publicly confirmed deserves scrutiny. The question and the children are entirely separate things. The question is about the record. The record has a blank space. That blank space has never been filled. Now here is something worth sitting with the institutional silence that has followed the Vickers interview. No spokesperson has addressed it. No palace statement has engaged with the timeline question as Vickers framed it on camera. No representative of the Sussexes has responded publicly to a named, credentialed historian describing the birth timeline as crazy businesses in a cleared publication. That silence is its own data point, and it needs to be read carefully.
Arms. And also, why is the belly several shades browner than anywhere else? It's not supposed to be browner.
Institutions do not respond to every question. They respond proportionally to the threat level a question represents. When a question lives at Tier 1, a YouTube channel, a social media account, a commentator without institutional backing, silence is the correct response. Engaging would only amplify. But when a question reaches Tier 3, a named historian, a cleared manuscript, a 5-star broadsheet review, a Daily Mail serialization, silence becomes a calculation with a growing cost. The longer that silence holds as the question continues moving through the tiers, the more conspicuous it becomes. Let's talk about those tiers directly, because understanding how a story moves through them is central to understanding why this week matters as much as it does. Every significant story that eventually breaks into the mainstream follows a recognizable path. It starts at the fringe, dismissed, mocked, attributed to obsession or bad faith. Then it finds a voice with one foot in the mainstream, someone with credibility in one world but not yet fully accepted in another. The mainstream still holds the line, but the question has moved. Then someone fully inside the establishment touches it carefully, precisely, with everything to lose if they get it wrong. And at that point, the question is no longer coming from outside the walls. It is coming from inside the same room the mainstream occupies, and the mainstream cannot ignore it indefinitely without that ignoring becoming a story of its own. Lady C was Tier 1 in 2020, passionate, informed, relentless, and dismissed. The question she raised was real, but the messenger made it easy for the mainstream to look away. Wotton's program, with its mix of insider access and outsider energy, represented Tier 2, the question getting louder, reaching a bigger audience, but still carrying enough controversy around the format to give the broadsheets a reason to keep their distance. Vickers in a Hodder hardback, reviewed by The Telegraph, serialized in the Daily Mail, climbing the Sunday Times chart, that is Tier 3. And Tier 3 is where the math changes for every editor and every royal correspondent in Britain who has been carefully not writing this story for 6 years. The royal rota has not engaged yet. The mainstream broadsheets have not published the Vickers timeline, quote, with the seriousness it now deserves. But the window in which they can continue to avoid it is closing, and it is closing faster because of what arrives next. Andrew Loney's book on the House of York, the #1 Sunday Times bestseller from last August, drops its paperback edition on May 21st, just 5 days from now. Loney himself has described the new material in this edition as sensational. Loney is not a YouTube commentator. He is a literary agent turned serious historian whose work has been reviewed by the broadsheet press and taken seriously by the very outlets that have been sitting on this question. When a historian at that level uses the word sensational about new material in a paperback release, that is a signal, and the timing of that signal, arriving in the same week as the Vickers interview, is not something any attentive royal editor will have missed. The window between the Vickers interview and the Lowney drop is a very specific and very pressurized window. It is the window in which the royal rota will have to make a real decision, engage with a question that is now living in 2 separate Tier 3 publications and 1 Telegraph podcast, or hold the line and hope the moment passes before their editors start asking why they haven't written about it. That decision is harder to make this week than it was last week. Last week, the question lived on YouTube. This week, it lives in W.H. Smith. The editorial calculation has genuinely changed, and every royal correspondent in Britain understands that even if none of them have committed it to print yet, what this week has demonstrated, more clearly than any single previous development on this story, is that patience is not just a virtue in this kind of work, it is a methodology. Lady Colin Campbell raised this question in 2020 from a chair in a castle in West Sussex, in streams that ran for hours, to an audience the mainstream was perfectly comfortable dismissing. She was attacked in column inches. She was characterized as a loose cannon, as someone with form, as a voice that serious people did not need to engage with. She kept going anyway. She kept the timeline. She kept the documentary record. She kept asking the same question that the record itself was asking: why is the line blank? 6 years later, the man who helped carry the late Queen's coffin into St. George's Chapel sat down in front of a camera and confirmed that the question is legitimate, that the blank space is real, that the secrecy, in his own careful words, is the part he cannot square. That is not a small development in the history of how institutional stories actually move, not in films, not in dramatic whistleblower moments, but in the slow, real world where records sit in archives and questions wait for the right voice. This is how the shift happens, not with a single revelation, not with a confession, with a patient accumulation of credibility that eventually reaches a person in the right position, with the right platform, who says the quiet part in measured language on camera while promoting a book about something else entirely. And then the question is somewhere it was not before, and it cannot go back. There is one more thing worth naming before Saturday arrives, and the Loney chapter changes the conversation again. The fact that Vickers was not there to talk about Archie is not a minor detail. It is arguably the most important detail of this entire week. He was not recruited, he was not briefed, he was not sitting across from Wootton with a prepared statement about the birth timeline. He was there for his Queen Elizabeth biography, and the question found him in the middle of an interview about something else. That is how you know the question has genuine weight. When a man with everything to protect, in the middle of a promotional tour for a major biography, allows the conversation to go there and speaks to it honestly. That is not a planted story. That is a historian saying what he actually thinks, because the evidence, as he reads it, supports saying it. We will be back the moment the Lowney paperback lands, and based on everything Lowney has signaled about that new material, that video will not wait long after the 21st. The next chapter of this story is already written, it just hasn't been published yet. When it is, you will want to have the full context of everything that happened this week sitting in your head, because the Loney drop will only make sense against the backdrop of Vickers, and the picture those two things make together is going to be very hard for the royal rota to keep ignoring. Drop your verdict in the comments right now. Has the establishment finally caught up with what Lady Colin Campbell has been saying for 6 years? Is the Vickers interview the genuine tipping point, the moment this question permanently changed tiers and cannot be walked back? Or is this a carefully managed one-off that will fade before the broadsheets ever have to make a real editorial decision about it? The comments section on this story runs deep, and every single one gets read because on a question this layered, the audience often sees angles that deserve their own videos. If this gave you something real to think about, hit that like button. It directly affects how many people this story reaches. And this is exactly the kind of story that deserves the widest possible room. Subscribe so the Loney drop lands in your feed the moment it goes live. You do not want to come to that video without having seen this one first. Share this with someone who has been following the Sussex story and hasn't yet seen the Vickers interview in full context, because the interview without the context is interesting, but the interview with everything laid out around it is something else entirely. The next chapter drops Saturday. Be here for it.